everyone. Now we are on to the endocrine system. This lecture is going to be about hormones. I'm not going to talk about any specific hormones or any specific endocrine glands, although I might mention them. The focus on the type of hormones and how they work, right? So the next lecture will be on endocrine system, and then I will talk about specific glands and specific hormones, and then you'll need to know that then. So my suggestion for now is to not worry too much about learning the names of any of the hormones yet, and just focus on understanding the interactions between the hormones and the body cells. Okay, let's get into an overview first for the endocrine system. It's about control, and there's two organ systems in the body whose job it is to control the rest of the body. And so the first one would be the endocrine system, obviously, since I brought it up. What would be the second one? The second organ system that controls the body would be the nervous system. So the endocrine system and the nervous system, they're working together with each other to help control the activities of all of the other organ systems. Okay, so really that's the main function of the endocrine system, control. Okay, the other thing I wanted to mention before we get too into this is let's talk about what we mean by endocrine. Okay, so endocrine is sort of the opposite of an exocrine gland. Exocrine means that the glands secrete a product onto the surface of the body. Now, please note that the surface doesn't necessarily have to be like your external surface. You also have internal surfaces, for example, secreting into the digestive tract. The digestive tract is a surface of the body because it's continuous with the outside. So those would also be exocrine glands. And then we also, for example, the pancreas. The pancreas we've already seen in the digestive system, it secretes the pancreatic juice. That would be the product there. Okay, and then we also have endocrine. Endo means inside, and so endocrine glands, they secrete into the body, and they're going to secrete into the bloodstream. The product of all of the endocrine glands are going to be called hormones. And we're going to talk about what those are today. And the hormones are always secreted into the bloodstream. From there, they're going to travel around within the bloodstream until they reach their target organ. Okay, so they don't require any ducts because they're going to just travel in the bloodstream there. Okay, so let's talk about, well, what is a hormone? Okay, so hormone is usually referred to as a chemical messenger. So let's break that down, and what I want to do is talk about sort of each piece of that. I'm going to talk about the types of chemicals in this lecture piece, and then another lecture piece I'll do on how you get the message into the cell. And then I'll talk a little bit about, well, what is the message? What types of effects does it have on the cell? So types of chemicals. When you look at hormones, the hormones are put into one of two categories, and it has to do with their polarity. Some of them are going to be put into water soluble, and water soluble means that they are hydrophilic. And remember, water is polar, like dissolves like, so that means that these water soluble hormones are going to be polar, and most of these are either amino acid based, which means they're made up of amino acids, or sometimes they're amino acid derivatives where you start with a amino acid and it's just sort of slightly modified, but it's still fairly polar, and therefore it would be water soluble. The second type of hormones are classified as lipid soluble. Lipid soluble means that they are non-polar, because lipids are non-polar, and therefore they are hydrophobic, which means they do not interact and mix and dissolve with water. And those are going to be steroids. Okay, so let's look at that a little bit more carefully. For the water-soluble hormone, they are amino acid based. Again, they're either proteins or they're made up of amino acids and changed in some way. Most of the hormones are going to be water-soluble hormones. An example, my favorite one, by the way, is oxytocin. And oxytocin, if you look at it, it's a little bit complicated, but if you look at the pieces, you're going to see you're going to see the basic amino acid structure, right? So here's your amine group right there. Okay, those amine groups will be modified in several ways as you create the protein, but you still have those high levels of oxygen and nitrogen. And when you have oxygen and nitrogen in a compound, that in a molecule, that makes it more polar. Okay, so the water-soluble hormones are going to be fairly polar, and that's going to affect how they interact with the cells. Whereas the lipid-soluble hormones are going to be created from cholesterol. So here is the structure of a cholesterol, and what you see is every time these rings right here, these are carbon rings, and coming off of these carbons is a lot of hydrogen, right? So you have these a bunch of carbon rings with hydrogens all over them, and then you've got these chains of carbon with hydrogen all over them. You might have a little bit of oxygen, but not that much, and therefore this is why these molecules are nonpolar. Okay, so the lipid-soluble hormones are collectively called steroids, and they include things like estrogens, testosterone, the cortisol, which is produced from the adrenal gland. And so they're going to behave differently in the body because they are non-polar. Okay, and if you look, you can really see how the cholesterol is sort of like the main shape, and then you kind of change it a little bit to create each of the different types of steroid hormones. Okay, so that's enough for this little piece. I'm going to then move on and talk about how you interact with a cell.